Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. Today I wanted to make a different kind of video. I want to talk about building better and hopefully funner characters from a roleplay standpoint. And I spend a lot of time on this channel talking about optimizing and multi-classing and crunching numbers and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed that aspect of the game, but I also really just enjoy making fun characters and playing the character itself. And I think that a lot of times we get really concerned with the numbers or the class or the race of our character, and we forget that the most important thing is your personality and who you're playing. And I've been guilty of this myself, and I think that a lot of times even veteran players, though usually less often with veteran players, but we tend to think of things like our class and our race defining who the person is, not our role play choices, which is what really should be deciding who you are as a person. I also think that, especially with newer players, we have a tendency to, maybe want to emulate somebody else, right? Like you see some other character in fiction or some sort of literature, and you decide you like that character, and you want to make somebody similar, or maybe you just want to make that exact same guy. And I think that's fine as a starting point. I'm not trying to rip on that idea at all. But hopefully we also advance beyond that and get to the point where we want to create our own interesting and unique characters with, interesting personalities and stuff. So I want to talk about some things that I've found that have worked well for me, and some of the mistakes I've made as well, because, I'm not perfect at this either. I still play characters that end up being generic or bland, and it happens sometimes. And there's really nothing worse than being in a long campaign playing a character that you just don't really enjoy that much. If you're going to be playing that character for a year or more, you want to like who they are. You want to have fun with that person. So I want to talk a bit about some of the key elements, I think. One of them is to just know what your role is going to be in the group. I think a lot of times we try to make these characters that are going to be good at everything, and we end up being decent at everything and excelling at nothing. And I would way rather have a character with really good strengths and really obvious weaknesses, because weaknesses can be a lot of fun to play into as well, right? There's nothing wrong with having a character with a bunch of flaws. But I also want to be good at something. I want to feel like I'm excelling in at least one area of the game, And maybe that's in combat. Maybe it's a social character, and I'm really good with persuasion and deception type roles. And then I try to use those to, my advantage a lot. But I want to be good at something. So I think that that's an important aspect of any character I've enjoyed, is just knowing what I want to be good at and what stuff I'm okay at just not being good at all. And that's just going to be part of the game, right? You've only got so many points to spend. You can't be great at everything. I think that backstory can really help, but I also think backstory is sometimes overrated. And I'm a big backstory guy, so I'm not trying to say don't have a good backstory. But I think that I've seen characters where literally their backstory is, I'm a thief. It's like, okay, so what do? I steal stuff. Right now, I'm thinking about robbing the innkeeper. That or stabbing the innkeeper and then robbing him. And, that could sound shallow, but that could also be a fun character, maybe. And I've also seen characters where they have, 1,000-page backstories practically, and the most epic things they ever do all ended up being in the backstory, and nothing they ever did at the table was interesting or compelling at all. And I don't want to be that either, right? So just because you have a good backstory doesn't mean you're going to have a great character. And just because you have a bad backstory doesn't mean you're going to have a bad character either. But I do think it helps to kind of have some basic ideas. And I do think that one thing I want to talk about really briefly, I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but Xanathar's actually has an excellent section on This Is Your Life. And they talk about ideas and not rules. They talk about origins. They have tables if you want to randomize things to see where your birthplace was, siblings, birth order, etc., etc., etc. They've got things for different, your different backgrounds. Like if you want entertainer, they got things you can roll on: folk hero, charlatan, acolyte, druid, monk, sorcerer, wizard, everything, different life events. And I think that going through a lot of that stuff can be really fun. I wouldn't feel like I have to go by whatever I roll, but if I'm, feeling uncreative, I think that's a decent start. But just having an idea of who your character was before they became an adventurer is very helpful sometimes. I also want to always wonder, why did I become an adventurer? Like, what compelled me to not just be a farmer? What compelled me to risk my life fighting dragons and entering deep dark dungeons and stuff, and to trust some rather ne'er-do-well looking sorts with my life, and have them trust me with theirs. That's not a very sane or logical decision sometimes. So, I want to have a reason. Why did I become an adventurer? I want to have a basic idea of some goals, and also I want to have, I don't just want to call them weaknesses, but I want to have things that I care about, things that I'm afraid to lose. I think a lot of times we think we want to make this character and we have no strings attached to anything. We have no family that's alive, everything, whatever, right? And a lot of times we sort of see this as being a strength because none of that stuff can get used against you. But that's actually kind of the problem, is that if you don't have anything you care about, you're not as invested in the game usually. Because in a good campaign, and I've been in some really excellent campaigns where this was a factor, when things you care about are put in danger, your engagement with the game goes through the roof. And now you have something to fight for. And it's not just, we're going to go into the dungeon, kill whatever's in there, and take their stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that either. I've had characters where that was their motivation. That's perfectly fine too. But it's a different level of engagement when, the NPC big bad goes after your family or something like that. And now your character has a reason for doing what they're doing. And I find it just makes the game much more enjoyable when I have things that I'm afraid to lose. Like I said, I also want to have goals. So I'm going to try to keep the story rather brief. But I played a game before called Exalted. It was a long time ago, so I'm probably going to get some of the details wrong. But I remember that was a game where basically the characters were like demigods. And a lot of people made fighter type characters because they were really weird combinations where you could have unblockable attacks and then also have unbeatable defenses. And so the only way you could ever lose is if you fought somebody else and their unblockable attack got through your unbeatable defense, because then you had to roll to see what happened. But I decided everybody else was playing fighter characters. I was going to play a summoner. So I made this female sorceress. And excuse me. One of the things I wanted to do is there was this tier 3 spell, because there's only 3 tiers of spells in that game. And the tier 3 spell where you could basically create your own wizard's fortress. And it was this magical place, and you could have like astral servant type things that would serve you. You could have, I was going to have this permanent summoning circle etched into the ground, so I could summon beings of unimaginable power and try to bind them. And you could get bonuses on all that kind of stuff, so it was actually way easier in your own laboratory. And I think stuff cost less spell points to cast too in there. So there was a bunch of benefits, but I needed to have these 5 statues of myself crafted by a master craftsman, and there were different types of metal, or I think you could even make them out of wood, but then then it was garbage. You got really small bonuses, and depending on what metal you use, you got better bonuses when you rolled for your tower and stuff. It was kind of complicated, but I decided that's what I want to do. I want to build a giant, awesome wizard fortress tower thing. So in the course of our adventures, we ended up stealing, or acquiring, I should say, a shipment of this metal called orichalcum, which was it was the best metal in the game that I could get. And, as an evil king, we just, reappropriated his materials for ourselves. And at some point, we'd found this, other demigoddess chick, and we'd helped her out and become friends with her. So we just, we used her house to store all of our stuff at, right? And there was also, these nodes or nexuses, I think they're called nexuses, and it was up to, 5 of them, 5-star nexus rating. And they give you bonuses to casting spells, right? Because it was this concentration of power, right? You could have air ones and earth ones and whatever else, right? So she had a level 4 nexus, which was the strongest we'd ever found. But that was hers, and we were friends with her, so I'm not going to do anything about it. So we just throw the statues there. Eventually, then we kill this evil wizard, and I get his spell book, and he has a bunch of powerful demons and devils and different kinds of beings that we could summon. But a bunch of them were beyond my power still, because I wasn't strong enough to summon them. But I noticed one of them had this like really weird, Lovecraftian abomination name, like Demoness of the Forge. And I'm like, Demoness of the Forge? I wonder if she could sculpt my statues for me. So as we continue on, I eventually become powerful enough to summon her. So I make my summoning circle, I summon her, I successfully bind her into my service for a year and a day. It turns out that her crafting skills are through the roof, like insanely good. Like the greatest mortal craftsman had like a third of her bonuses. So she just absolutely nails all the dice rolls, and these like statues of me out of the orichalcum are like basically just mirror image duplicates of me. They're as perfect can be. And I'm like, yes, but of course I still need a place to build my tower. So we continue adventuring, and we're getting more and more powerful. By now we're getting to be, kind of a big deal, and we've kind of gone from like demigod to like lesser god status, right? And we enter this one area, and this place is like the Wild West. It's just like 1,000 different kings and queens and dukes and duchesses and czars and, viscounts or whatever other name they give themselves. And they're just fighting constantly for control. And none of these people have any real power. Like, if you rule like 2 farms and 15 villagers, you could call yourself a king, right? And then, a week later, somebody else kills you, and now they take your 2 farms and your 15 villagers. And now they're the king, or duke, or whatever. And so we end up kind of making friends with these 3 different rulers. They all kind of were jerks, actually. But we end up doing a bunch of quests and helping them out. We kill the Black Witch of the Fens, and we kill the mummy lich thing in this one dungeon. We even kill the Abyssal Lord in this one dungeon, and we cleanse the thing of its evil. And that's when I realized that this dungeon is a level 5 Nexus. And I think, I'm going to build my wizard's tower on top of the dungeon. So we grab our horse and our cart, we ride all the way back to our friend's place, we load up all my statues, we ride all the way back again. I cast my ritual, which takes 24 hours, and I have to make several dice rolls. But by now I've got a lot of big bonuses and stuff, because the statues are perfect, and I get a big bonus for that. And everything is perfect, and we've got a level 5 Nexus, so I get even bigger bonuses for that. And of course, I nail it, and I build my perfect giant wizard tower that I've now been working on for like a year and a half, and just, it felt so good. Now, as a quick epilogue to the story, it turned out that those 3 rulers I mentioned were perfectly happy to have us kill the Abyssal Lord and the Black Witch of the Fens, and to have us kill the Mummy Lord, but they didn't necessarily want me building a giant wizard tower right in their backyards. So they all showed up with their armies to try to kick us out, and I'm just like, no, we're not leaving. So one of them got mad and tried to actually assassinate us, but my one fighter friend, who was just an absolute god in hand-to-hand combat, I think he hadn't even been wounded in like probably 3 or 4 months of gameplay. The guy was so, imperfect, or impenetrable is the word I'm trying to say, defenses for the win, right? So the guy tries to kill him, but he kills him instead. And then one of the other rulers gets mad, so he challenges him to a duel. It turns out this guy's actually really, really good. He never managed to wound our buddy, not even once, but the combat lasted like 8 or 10 rounds, which was insane, because this guy just killed everything in like, 1 or 2 rounds usually, right? So this guy was really, really good, but, eventually our buddy kills him too. So then the 3rd ruler decides, maybe I can keep my wizard fortress. And I'm like, well, thank you. You can now have all their territories, and you can just be the queen of all 3 of these lands. And I will also do any magical services you need. I'm just going to need 25% of all the taxes you raise from all 3 of your kingdoms, though. She didn't like that much, but ultimately she agreed because she didn't want to die. And that was essentially where the campaign ended. We did a bit more beyond that, but it felt really good that I'd had this goal that I've been working on forever, and was finally able to achieve it. And like I said, it's been a long time since I played the game. I probably got some of the details wrong at this stage, but in my head, that's kind of how I remember things going. So anyway, have a goal, work towards it. Have things you care about and don't want to lose, because this can give you a lot of motivation. One of the cooler characters I ever saw is my friend Jaden played a halfling thief who became an adventurer because he got married and had, you know, a family now, and he just didn't really want his children to have to like be peasant farmers under the whip of some cruel lord ruling the land. And he thought, maybe if I become an adventurer, maybe I can like provide a better life for my family, and they won't have to be what I've been all my life, and just, you know, kind of this lowly peasant, right? And it was a very simple backstory, but it was also very cool, and it gave him some powerful motivations. And really, that's what I'm looking for in a good backstory. So I thought that was really good. I liked that character a lot. And like I said, don't be afraid to have things that tie you to the game world, because that also helps you to be engaged in the game world a lot more. Be adaptable. I think a lot of times we have an idea of a character in our mind, and then we just want the game world to conform to that character, rather than realizing that our character can change with the story. I mean, if you look at like most movies, you know, Luke's just gonna stay in town and or stay on the farm and, you know, bring in the next crop of harvests or whatever. You know, then aunt and uncle get killed, and now he decides to become a Jedi Knight and learn the ways of the Force. You know, that kind of stuff happens all the time in games. There's a great example in the new book, Tasha's Guide to Everything, of a character who is an Oath of Devotion paladin, and they talk about changing your subclass, which is now an optional rule, right? And one of the examples they give, I can't remember the exact example, I should have reread it before I did the video, but I hadn't really planned on talking about it, so whatever. One of the examples they give, you got the Oath of Devotion paladin, and something happens to all of her town or village or convent or whatever it is, everybody gets killed, and so she comes back, finds it all in ashes, just like Luke's farm, and decides to swear to become an Oath of Vengeance paladin instead, and get revenge on the people who brought down whatever it was, her family or town or village or convent, whatever. But I think that's a great example of your character changing with the story. So don't be afraid to like change that. Don't be afraid to kind of adapt to like the other players in your group. I've had lots of characters where like in my head I'm like Judge Dredd, you know, and this character is just gonna be like totally awesome. It's just gonna be so awesome. And then like at the table they end up being like, you know, like the dorky hallway monitor in junior high or something instead. So, you know, don't be afraid to like realize when something is working and go with it, and realize when it's not and kind of maybe back off a little and steer the character in a different direction. Because that can be fun too, right? Maybe your character is just not as epic in your mind as you thought he was, and maybe that's okay. Some of the funnest characters are the most flawed characters. I like to have a good idea in my mind of like what my character is working towards and what he's trying to achieve. I want to have a long-term goal. I don't mind having some short-term goals, you know, but I want to have something that's going on besides just the dungeon master handing us quests. Don't be afraid to have fun characters. Those are usually the best. I find that a lot of times I have great character concepts in my head, but they end up being really dark. So that's just not fun sometimes for me or for the other party members. So I'll give you an example of another character I had. This was actually a character I was thinking of making back when I made my Barbarian Warlock multi-class video. And, you know, I was kind of like what I was thinking of when I was doing him. So the idea was he was going to be a barbarian who multi-classed with Pact of the Fiend, there we go, and became a warlock. And so I kind of had my barbarian timeline, you know, of like the tribal history and all the stuff, and everything leading up to my guy becoming an adventurer, essentially. And I think that's actually one thing about multi-classing characters, is I find a lot of times people think that it's just like a power game or type of move. But I actually find a lot of times my multi-class characters are just better developed characters from a roleplay standpoint. Because I'm not just working on this axis, the barbarian axis, right? I'm also working on this axis, my warlock axis. Because what's my warlock story? I'm not just a barbarian, I'm also a warlock. And where these intersect or meet is kind of where the magic happens, right? That's the big life-changing event that caused me to go from this path down a different road and then to become an adventurer. And it doesn't have to be multi-class, you know, like you could play an arcane trickster and you start thinking about, okay, but why magic? Where did the magic come from? Maybe you were a street urchin and you never had a family, but you were taken in by this gang of thieves and cutthroats and stuff. But on a dare, you decide to break into this wizard's tower. You get caught. The wizard, though, instead of handing you over to the authorities or anything, decides to make you his apprentice. And so you start working for him. And you start picking up some of the magic. And, maybe why did you become an adventurer? Maybe somebody killed the wizard. Maybe the wizard died of natural causes. Maybe, he got sick of you because you tried to steal something from him. He kicked you out. And now you're just mostly a thief, but you still have a bit of magic that you learned. Whatever the story is, just the intersection of thief and magic already makes the character a little more interesting, in my opinion, right? So, the barbarian warlock idea, basically, like I said, I had my tribal history and stuff. I decided, though, that my character at some point ended up disgracing himself. I think he probably fled from battle, and so the tribe, had no tolerance for this because it's, strict honor culture type of thing. And so they ended up like cutting his hair as a mark of shame and branding his face with the brand, right? Which shows everybody else that he's a coward. So now none of the other tribes of our people will have anything to do with him either. So he's forced to live off the land, which is where he got the survival skill, of course. And, make his own clothing and hunt his own game and has to build his own shelters. But through this time, he becomes very, very jaded and bitter and quite angry at, the tribe for casting him out. And he's forced to live this kind of meager existence and survive off the land. But one night, he has a dream, and he remembers himself as a young boy learning from the village elders about the history of the tribe and how they'd had to come across the plains and through the middle of the winter and cross the river, and the river, hadn't been completely frozen and some people had fallen in. And all these hardships and environmental hazards and everything else that they'd had to survive. But the worst wasn't an environmental hazard. It was the demon wolf, which was just this weird wolf made of shadows and fire that had always pursued them. And whenever somebody got sick or fell behind, the demon wolf would take them. And sometimes, when the tribes all gathered around the fires, they could hear the wolf and see just these burning eyes, like actual fires just out in the night. And they knew that the wolf was watching them. And so my character decides, well, if my tribe doesn't want me, maybe the demon wolf does. Maybe I can make a pact with the demon wolf. And so he reverse engineers the journey, trying to find, going by the landmarks from the tales and trying to find the river and everything else, and travels further than our people have gone since the original migration, right? And when he's finally out of food and at the end of his rope and sick and delirious with fever and, lights his fire for the night, thinking that in the morning he will probably be dead because, he's just at the end of his rope. And that night, of course, the demon wolf comes with a proposition for him. And I thought that'd be a cool character. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, if nobody else in my party cares about my tribe or my people, then it's probably just not going to be a fun character forever. For anyone, I should say, sorry. Because my story is very much tied up in my own backstory, and that's what my character's focused on, and nobody else is going to care. And I ultimately decided he'd make a great NPC villain in a campaign with a barbarian player. And then maybe this could be this, exiled character from their past or something. Maybe it's an older brother or something like that who is cast out from the tribe, right? And, then they come back and now they could be this big villain character in the character's story. And I just realized that as a PC, I think he was too much into his own story and he's just going to be really a dark character and not a lot of fun to play. So I ultimately decided not to play him. But it still gave me a great idea for an NPC. And I think he would make an amazing villain. And I kind of love that whole story, right? We recently, in my gaming group, discovered that since really only me and one other guy are still working full-time, thanks to everybody else being laid off from the COVID, that we actually have more time to play. So one of the other guys said he wants to run a game on a different night of the week, so we can play my game one night a week and his game one night a week. And I started to think about what I wanted to play. And I've always wanted to play a Paladin Warlock, and I've never done it yet, actually. I made a video about Paladin Warlock, but I've never actually played one. I did Paladin Sorcerer, but in my mind they're very different. Sorcerer is more Because of quicken casting, you're a lot more of a caster. Paladin and Warlock, you're more of a smiter, with still some casting thrown in, obviously. But, it's not like the Sorcerer where you can quicken cast a buff spell or whatever else. You can quicken cast Bless and then immediately attack with Bless, as opposed to normally casting it, not getting to use Bless until your next round. Maybe you get hit and lose concentration, you never even get to benefit from your own spell. That sucks. You're way better off quicken casting it, and then attacking twice with Bless, and then just, smiting people with your other spell slots. Whereas the Warlock's more about just big smites. So I decided I was going to make a Oath of Vengeance Paladin multiclassed with Hexblade, because Hexblade's great and it's a good combination. And I mentioned this to a couple of people I work with, because I work in like a warehouse with like 150 or 200 other people, right? So there's a bunch of other guys there that play D&D, just not with me. They have their own gaming groups. So I was talking to a couple of these guys, not at once, separate conversations, but they both mentioned almost the exact same thing, word for word, which was that they didn't think that a Paladin should be able to multiclass with a Warlock. And I was like, why not? And they were like, well, it's just, Paladins are good, Warlocks like serve some sort of evil power. And I was like, okay, maybe back in like 2nd edition, Paladins had to be lawful good. I was like, but let's say that I was playing an Oath of Devotion Paladin, and I wanted to multiclass with a Celestial Pact Warlock, and I wanted to serve some sort of angel. Would you guys have a problem with that? And, both of them were kind of like, oh no, I mean, that would kind of make sense. And I was like, so why couldn't an Oath of Vengeance Paladin want to serve like the Raven Queen or something like that? And really, neither one had an answer. But it wasn't, I don't tell the story to dump on my coworkers, because I don't really blame them. The fact is, I've had this conversation with a lot of people in the past where you start talking about multiclass, like, oh, well, I don't know about that combination, or I don't know about, this, or, well, maybe if you have a good story reason for it. And I'm like, why would you do anything in the game without a story reason for it? I mean, every quest or anything I undertake is probably for some sort of story reason, either because we're supposed to be doing this mission or because we felt like doing it for our own sake. But I mean, all of it's in service of the story, right? I mean, everything I do is in some way or another for a story reason. And if I decide to like change class or pick up a different skill or learn a different weapon, it's probably for some sort of story reason. And this isn't just like I said, this isn't just a shot at those guys. I've seen like huge D&D channels with over 500,000 subscribers, and whenever they talk about multiclassing, they almost always throw in the obligatory, but make sure you have a story reason for doing it. It's like everything you do should be in the service of the story, in my opinion at least. And so to me, that's pretty much irrelevant. Of course there's going to be a story reason for it, And I think a lot of times, like I mentioned earlier, it's easy to think that people multiclass purely for power gaming reasons. And I'm not going to lie, that is a big part of it. I enjoy the mechanical aspects of trying to fit different classes together and come up with like really cool and innovative combinations. And sometimes not innovative ones. Sometimes just ones that work really well. But I also think, like I mentioned earlier, when you have two different classes to work with instead of only one, excuse me for a second. Sorry. When you have two different classes to work with instead of one, you actually have like opportunities for way more story, because you're not just a fighter, or you're not, and there's nothing wrong with being just a fighter either, by the way. My last point that I really want to talk about is to try to fit in with the other party members, make characters that are going to be fun and adaptable. I already know for my Oath of Vengeance Paladin, I'm not going to go super dark on the guy. I was thinking about this a lot, and I was trying to think of like fun characters in revenge type movies, right? That I could kind of steal elements of those characters. And I really kind of started thinking about like Inigo Montoya from The Princess Bride, with maybe a little Dread Pirate Roberts thrown in for good measure. And Mel Gibson's character from Payback, I can't remember what his name was, but he was kind of fun sometimes. A little dark and edgy, but still fun. And maybe a little bit of Corwin from the Chronicles of Amber, just as icing on the cake. And by stealing these kind of elements and keeping the character light and fun, but still focused, right? Inigo Montoya was all about, getting revenge for his murdered father, right? but that didn't mean that he couldn't screw around and duel left-handed and everything else, right? I think it's very possible to have a character that can fit in with the table and not try to like overshadow all the other players and dominate the storyline. And I've had games where, you know, maybe other people don't have a clear idea of what their character wants to do. And so they just end up following you because you do. I mean, I've had that happen a few times where I have a clear character concept with goals, nobody else does, so they just decide to come along and help me. And that's fine, but I don't want to impose that on them. If they just decide, hey, let's help you out on that, then cool. But I don't want to try to force the other players into it, right? So those are my main thoughts. I do think that at the heart of it all, what you do with the character at the table is way more important than your backstory or any amount of planning. You might want to change your goals. You might want to adapt your goals to fit the storyline. Whatever you have to do to just kind of, you know, make it work. But if you have no goals and you have no backstory and you have no planning, you're setting yourself up for a very bland and boring character. And like I said, that doesn't necessarily always happen, but when it does, it really sucks. And nobody wants to play a game for a year on a character that they don't enjoy. And I've been in games where people at the table are constantly like changing characters because they keep thinking like, oh, maybe it's just this class, or maybe it's my spell list, or maybe I just don't enjoy this type of caster. I'm going to try this type of caster, or maybe I should have gone ranger instead of paladin, or whatever. And they keep changing characters over and over and over again, even in the same campaign. And I think that usually in that case, it's not a problem with your characters per se. It's a problem with you just not designing a character that was going to be able to fit into the game. And because really the fault isn't the class, it's not the race, it's not the spell list, it's a problem with the characters you're designing in that case, which is why it keeps carrying over to every new character you make too. And like I said, I've made these mistakes myself. Even as veteran players, we make some of these mistakes, right? Especially after you've played like 50 or 100 different characters, and you're always trying to think of new characters for the game because you don't want to just play the same guy you played in some other game all the time. It can get really hard, and sometimes you just kind of phone it in, or you're playing a new system, you don't really know how it works, so you just kind of try to like play it. And, you know, it happens. But, like I said, as long as you're picking up your cues from the story and adapting and incorporating the things the Dungeon Master is doing and making them kind of like your own, then I think you're going to have a very engaging character and a very engaging game experience, which is really, like, at the end of the day, what we're all trying to achieve here, right? I mean, if we just wanted to, you know, go through the act of, like, killing things and leveling up a character, we could all just be playing a video game instead. But we're at a table, or online, but either way, we're interacting with other human beings, playing a role-playing game with a character that we have made and customized essentially every aspect of the character and created them from the ground up. And, you know, so sometimes I hear people say like, well, you know, I'm not very creative or I'm not very imaginative. But honestly, you're playing a tabletop role-playing game. So you're already more creative than 95% of the human population who never have and never will, and, you know, can't be bothered to think of interesting ideas at all. You're already more creative than most of those people. So I do think that, you know, if you just kind of stretch yourself a little and think about some basic ideas. Who was I before I became an adventurer? Why did I become an adventurer? What do I want to do? What am I leaving behind? I think already just answering those basic questions, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. So that's basically everything I have for this video. As always, like, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell, all that kind of stuff. Mostly though, I want to hear from you in the comment section. If you have things that you think I missed, let me know. If you have like characters that you really love, like, oh man, I made this one character this once and he was like the greatest, and you know, I did this and this and this and it really worked for me. Share those experiences. I love reading those kind of things. And, you know, maybe I can incorporate those into future videos where I can be like, one of my subscribers shared this story, you know? And the truth is that we've probably all had characters that we've fallen in love with at some point. And we had like one or two characters that were just like, man, that was like the funnest character I ever made in like the greatest campaign ever. And maybe the campaign wasn't even that good, but you loved the character so much that, you know, it's all these years later, it's still with you. And I've had characters like that, you know. I've had multiple characters like that where, you know, I look back on it and think like, man, like I can't think about Vampire the Masquerade without thinking about my Ventru character, because he was awesome, and I just love that guy. And you know, to me, that's one of the best things about these kind of games, right? It's one of the things that it really gives you this chance to like express yourself and be creative in a very, very unique way. So, anyways, that's everything I have. Feel free to, you know, do all the YouTube stuff, and I'll see you next time. Bye.